book, Going Alone. Today, it's the namesake chapter, Going Alone. So, oh, look at the pelicans. There they are. There must be a school of fish out there. I see them hovering and diving. All right, let's do it. This chapter is the center of the book, so to speak, the point of realization before coming back from the deeper wilds of the desert. So let's wait no longer and go for it. Let me put it down. It's chilly today, almost October. I think it's the last day of September, and it really feels like it. It's going to be a crowded day today at the beach. They have the air show going on, and I hope that the clouds won't make it hard for the pilots to do their thing safely. Ooh, it's kind of chilly. Maybe I'll leave my socks on for now. And I will go for a swim afterwards. All right, I got a fresh copy. So I had to order a few new copies to send out to some new Patreon subscribers. Oh, by the way, this video, as all videos, are brought to you by my Patreon supporters. Minasan, hontou ni arigatou gozaimasu. Let's do it. So this is chapter, what is it, number 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Going Alone. And it, as all the chapters do in the book, it begins with an illustration from my daughter. There we go. This illustration is an illustration for a principle of the good life called the Homunculus. This is a man alone in a driverless bus on a sea of chaos. And if you read the book and you read that particular chapter, then maybe that'll make some sense to you. Here we go. Going Alone, discovering a universe without apparent meaning. And a quote. A major breakthrough of the scientific revolution, perhaps its greatest breakthrough, was to refute the intuition that the universe is saturated with purpose. Steven Pinker. The great indifference is a perspective which yields an improved understanding of the apparent true nature of the universe. It is a place of clear thought and relentless truth. The way there is never easy, never marked, and can only be reached in solitude, and when the only chance of return is under the power of one's own volition. What you find there may be worth the journey, even if only you alone can understand or appreciate the prize. There is no road or trail to the great indifference, for followers must always lose the way. Strike out at once along the direction of your first inclination, and your own path will soon be discovered. Note what you find or do not find, as discovery alone is its own satisfaction. And whatever you later relate to others will fall like alien words upon ears plugged and deafened by fraternity, solidarity, and the warm comfort of common society. Only your fellow travelers in wildness might understand, though their own solitary venture may insulate their ears to whatever vain utterances you elect to voice. I recommend this way to those who are ready to lose, prepared to be wrong, and desirous of truth ahead of comfort, peace, or immortality. Come this way for the sake of virtue, for a sound mind, an even temper, a restful heart, and, at last, an honest death. An end without hope of reward, reawakening, or revelation. A fixed point of terminus, punctuated upon the tail end of eternity, which is everything after the end of one's living. The vista of the great indifference will direct your gaze to your bruised, sore, and bleeding feet, which are the instruments of your arrival in that august place. The pain will grow intense with your notice, a gratifying reality. How sweet the moment of awakening, when the uncaring, corpse-like gaze of reality makes precious the breath of this moment and the next, without thought of any breath beyond, which is only a wishful potential vapor, nor the breath's already consumed, which have dispersed to mingle with the universal atoms, to never again return orbit round our fleeting mortal constitution. I would tell you the way to the great indifference if I truly thought I could, though if you go where I said it was found, then the telling would guarantee its absence. Go instead on your own, by your own motive force, along a way only you can see. Alone and accepting of your solitude, aware you may never come back, and if you do, that you may never find words to adequately convey what you truly found. So that's the prose introduction to the chapter. Captures and summarizes the essence of going alone. Now what follows are the notes from my muse, and they're offset in parentheses, and they also have a left justification to set them off. I explained this earlier in the book in the introduction section. These notes, I call them, from the muse are what I also sometimes refer as muse strikes, ideas, words that simply come to me. Not so much anymore. I don't really get muse strikes anymore, but they came to me during the 3 odd years that I was writing Going Alone, sometimes in the strangest places, causing me to pull to the side of the road to write them down. The interesting thing about them is that they come perfect, like an inspiration. I can understand how people can have that idea of a muse's inspiration. It's like it doesn't come from me, it just comes from somewhere else. And I'm scribbling, I'm like noting it down as the words arrive into my brain. And if I don't catch them while they're coming, they'll be gone forever. I can't bring them back. I've had to pull over to the side of the road on my motorcycle many times to write down or type it out, the words as they're boiling in my head, about to vanish away. And it's interesting, I've read from many other people how they have that same experience of the muse voice coming and then passing. And I don't think it's anything spiritual or otherworldly. I think it's just the circumstance and the circumstance of our mind in a particular way that invites these types of thoughts to come, and then those circumstances change and that moment passes. So what proceeds through the rest of this chapter are these muse strikes, and I'll describe in the book. I put you can see here's the end of the prose piece. Notes from my muse begin there. There's the italics with the left justification. And you'll see that each one of these has a little tilde mark to distinguish one muse strike from the next. I won't note that. I'll simply put in a pregnant pause to let you know that I'm moving from one to the next. Let's begin. Notes from my muse. When I talk about going alone, some may think I'm referring to hiking and camping all by oneself. That's partially right. But mostly, I'm referring to a mental endeavor to seek after and develop life principles without the reinforcing comfort of authority, dogma, or consensus. This doesn't require thinking up the ideas oneself, but instead using reason to discern if a proposition is true and fits with the reality of the world around us. That's going alone. It's only coincidence that being alone in very wild places is an excellent forum for rendering truth from the abundance of comforting propositions and stories we tell one another to keep back the dark. When you're alone in the dark, there's nowhere truth can hide. Emily and I lingered at the beach tonight until it was nearly dark. Just before we left, a middle-aged man arrived limping badly and wearing nothing more than a swimsuit and a beach towel around his neck. He deposited the towel on a rock and limped with difficulty straight into the sea. Once in the cold water and free of his bad leg, he began swimming powerfully out to sea, diving under a few large waves before making it clear of the surf. We watched him swim straight and direct, further and further as the night got darker and darker. We saw him swim past a family of dolphin passing far beyond the last rocks, in water more than 50 feet deep. The man never veered his course or turned either up or down the coast, but kept straight for open ocean, swimming hard and fast. He must have been more than a quarter mile out when darkness overtook our efforts to follow. My last sight of the man was a single swing of his arm rising above the now black sea. I noticed the street lights were on as Emily and I made our way back to the motorcycle, and I wondered if these would guide the man back to shore when he'd had enough of his solo nighttime winter ocean swim. I'm haunted by the desert now. The pull is powerful and relentless, like a vacuum drawing something to nothing. At the bookstore just now, I discovered a book titled Route 66 Ghost Towns. I eagerly read through the sections on the desert railroad communities of Essex, Amboy, Baghdad, Ludlow, Newberry Springs, and Daggett. The chapter ended with no mention of Siberia. It would seem I've made a very good choice in selecting Siberia as my adopted hometown. By this time tomorrow, I'll be in Siberia. I'll arrive about an hour before sundown as temps begin to descend from midday highs around 110 degrees or 43 C. There are no ghosts in Siberia, though there is much that is dead. The void left by humanity passing away here has made room for possession by the wind, the heat and cold, and the steady progress of time. These things ignore my presence, though they'd appear different if I was not alone. I'd see only ruin and desolation with another. I'd see ghosts which were never here. I leave a thinning trail of connection with every mile I put between my life and the desert. This thread grows so slender that 100 miles out I dangle like a spider on a silk strand. The melodramatic abyss looms, a humorous caricature of nature, if only it weren't so real. I hang there for a day, in the wind and the sun, knowing the threat of exposure is nothing compared to the frailty of that one long, slender thread. The steep and rugged mountains of Japan never scare me. Even that time I ran from the mother boar, and again several times when giant hornets swarmed to check me out. The mountains were far too civilized with life to offer any real threat. Not human life, but life itself. The mere fact that the landscape had a pulse, and a vibrant one at that, dissuaded my fear and alleviated my apprehension. Even to die in those remote, unpeopled mountains would be to pass in the embrace of what is both familiar and alive. The desert offers no such comfort. What lives there is sparse, mute, and still. There's little hum or buzz or grunt, just some howl from time to time, which carries lonesome sentiment and a desperate pleading. Even birdsong sings of solitude. The wind speaks loudest here, and the sun burns its case without respite from sunup to sundown. I fear the desert even before I go. I wonder how I'll feel about the mountains of Japan when I go back after the contrast of the desert. Probably get myself killed out there, being careless. I'm halfway to Siberia and thinking of that long 100-mile thread I mentioned earlier today. Could it be that the thread actually originates out here? How unlike the unthinking wastes of nature and the timeless non-existence before birth and after death. During the night at Siberia, I left camp to wander alone over the desert in search of night things. Nocturnal spiders and snakes and the things which stare from the dark with glimmering eyes. And the stars which come out and the moon in its time. The wind, too, enjoys the night, moving in warm gusts over the land, always inward, towards the deep center of the desert. While thus employed during my nighttime hike, I came upon that stone-lined footpath I've mentioned before. With nowhere better to go, I followed for a pace, minding the path's straight course from darkness into darkness, thinking over the mind, process, and hands which produced this way. What motive brought it about? What purpose did it serve? With every footstep here, long removed by the wind, only my own senseless allegiance to precedent justifies a cause I can never know. The desert is as sorry a companion for thought as it is for fraternity. I sometimes claim that my muse lives here, though that is a lie. Whatever sentience moves across the dark sands comes no further than the outskirts of my camp. I mistake its eyes reflected in my light for those of the fox who lived here first. Neither will come nearer than reflection, nor suggest more than aloof disinterest. The desert and the fox leave me to my own devices, to find thought and words on my own, caring for neither credit nor attribution. A nondescript slice of concrete in the desert marks the spot where a small island of gas pumps once stood. I discovered the remains of this old Route 66 service station by studying satellite imagery of the desert around the ghost town of Siberia. While exploring the site, my mind contrived the story of human ambition and loss here, which I suspect may bear more than fleeting resemblance to fact. And the ghosts I've borne in my mind for this place are now condemned to haunt these ruins for the rest of my days. I discovered all that remains of the gas station and cafe at the California ghost town of Siberia. Sal and Ruth built this place in the 20s out of mortar and desert sand. The combination home and business had 2 gas pumps and a service garage with a maintenance pit. There was a separate door into their cafe which had wooden floors and where Ruth served her customers on fine decorated chinaware. When traffic on the old highway at last gave out, Ruth and Sal made the tough decision to leave their life's work behind to fall to ruin and fade into the desert, when the couple sought better fortunes elsewhere. Today, nothing remains of the gas station and cafe but stone foundations and the outlines of lives now smothered in indifference. I further found the stairs which led into the abandoned roadside diner at Siberia, California. How many road-weary American pilgrims stepped up and through the door here for a half hour of relief from the trials of crossing the harsh desert in an unreliable jalopy, or miners coming in from the surrounding claims for a welcome taste of civilization and a home-cooked meal. How many would-be Californians, like my own great-grandfather, came here dreaming of a better life if they could only get across this cursed desert? It is possible my great-granddad may have actually been here. Is it possible my great-granddad may have actually been here? Did he perhaps at one time step up these 2 steps to receive his first formal welcome into California after his long journey from Illinois? The places of rest were few at that time along this inhospitable stretch of America's Mother Road, making the odds he'd been here not unreasonable nor very far-fetched. I'm going to stand up for just a second. Sometimes I feel myself getting a little tired, and standing up kind of helps me to move my mind and body. High desert temperatures today kept me near Siberia and far from the frontier where the great indifference doesn't loom. Why does it remain so far? Why can't it reclaim the ghost town in the same way as the nocturnal fox who haunts my camp, or the ruin which spoils every human artifact here? It seems human absence is not enough. All reminder must be gone, save the living pulse of a solitary individual, far off trail, far from any comfort or aid, which is the only companionship the great indifference may ever abide. I wonder if I'll sense this strange absence just before the light of my life winks out, when my body is far off trail, beyond any comfort or aid, when the dark frontier grows near and reality swells promise. I suspect I will. I suspect that's how we all die, and the reason we cling so desperately to this wondrous thing of life. We sense that our living is something of a revolt, a strange and orderly upclimb against the pole of universal disorder and chaos. The great indifference is that uncaring gravity well we hope to avoid by averting our eyes towards fellowship, love, and laughter, and by telling ourselves and one another comforting stories of reunion, reconciliation, and forgiveness. But the night doesn't care about our fear, nor the wind our chill, nor solitude our lonesome desperation. Better than stories is to face the night, stand in the wind, and embrace today the ones we love. Then, when we discover indifference looming with the intake of our final breath, we can close our eyes and smile peacefully at an inevitable reunion arrived at after a well-lived life. That one kind of sums up everything, the whole book right there. The journey out, the reconciliation of the reality of the world, the great indifference, and then the pursuit to come back, to bring ourselves back and make a good life in what time remains. And then when to die without a single backwards glance. An early lunch in a Route 66 cemetery at the ghost town of Ludlow. Nearly all the graves here are unnamed and assembled of scrap lumber and nails. Remembrance would be left to the imagination. Today's adventure did yield a very pleasant surprise. In my youth, my body could tolerate much heat and outdoor exertion with little impact besides a little weight loss and a propensity to go further than I should, resulting in many blind stumbles alone through darkened desert terrain after failing to find my camp before sundown. Back then, I could go all day and into the night with little fatigue and rarely dissuaded from any wilderness goal. For the record, this was before I went to Japan. This was when I was in my 20s and 30s. After returning to California from my life in Japan, I found my new desert short due to sudden exhaustion and a quite unfamiliar accompanying sense of fear over my physical well-being. I chalked this new limit up to my advancing age and resigned myself to a fate of steadily diminishing horizons with each successive year. And then came today. Wow, my old self has seemingly returned. At dawn, I hiked a few miles out from the ghost town of Siberia, cautious of the summertime desert inferno I knew would soon arrive, and concerned my body might quickly give out with the heat, extreme exposure, and exertion. By the time I returned from this first hike, the heat was indeed on, and I'd greedily consumed all my water before I arrived back at camp. I should have been redlined, but I was ready to go out again, and I did. After refilling my canteens, I struck out for round 2, an even longer and harder hike. By the time I was back again, the day was hotter and the water was again no more. Yet my body seemed ready to do it all over again. Far into this surprising, rediscovered capability. It's 4:30 p.m. now, and the desert will soon begin to cool. I feel as lively and ready as I did at dawn. Though the 8 liters of water which I've today drank and sweat away have left my exterior a sun-scorched, salty, dusty, and stinky mess, just like when I was young. How nice to meet my youthful self again out here in the summertime desert wastes. But don't worry, I won't be fooled. I'm 53, not 25. And no matter how good I may feel today, I must always respect my true age and my body's true condition. The desert around Siberia goes on tonight without me. Another dark passage of night, like billions before and billions to come. My presence so brief and fleeting and irrelevant as to escape notice of something with no capacity to notice. Such futile ends, those delicious thoughts under the railway bridge. So meaningless to eternity, my vain attempts at virtue. Still I think, still I pursue virtue, for eternity was never mine, and relevance is found in each moment of common human connection. Let the universe go on and pursue whatever mindless ends it holds. Just these words. Bring others with me to the desert if I didn't already know that solitude would retreat before our advance. The hot desert months protest my every ambition. Those far mountains, impossible. Those near hills, don't even think about it. A few days camping exposed upon the alluvium, maybe a day. Such dreams are reserved for winter, though even then I sense mute protest to my every solitary excursion. I previously believed that winter was the best season for desert hiking. Cold nights, snug in my good sleeping bag, warm, temperate days when I can walk for miles while drinking little and sweating less. But now, I suspect summer has become my preferred time to hike in the desert. I'm not there for the walk after all, or the sights, or, heaven forbid, any companionship. My aim is the limits, which are much nearer and more distinct, I would add sharper, when the temperature is above 100 degrees or 37 degrees Celsius. A simple August walk a half mile from camp while the inferno burns and the landscape twists and shimmers with threat goes as deep as a 5-mile December excursion over black barren peaks and through long twisting valleys of stone. Though I can turn and see camp, or the road, or my motorcycle, seemingly nearby under the summer sun, my mind presses such comforting thoughts aside with much concerned attention to my red, swelling hands, my nearly empty canteen, the total lack of any sheltering shade, and the onset of a woozy haze and dizziness, and faltering ability to see or think straight. Indifference looms then, surrounds, envelops, and ignores me as only its nature and capability demand. My skin then threatens to dry and crisp, and my bones to bleach and break, as my folly and insignificance are held like twin gifts in hands held upright in the direction of safety. This is what I sought with such indifference, with such difficulty in the winter wilds. This is what I sought with such difficulty in the winter wilds. This is what I found so easily in the summer desert, within footsteps of my car, when only I had the foresight to go alone, knew better, and went anyway. Over and over that theme has been repeated. Over and over I've discovered it's true. How the heck can I possibly reproduce that in Japan? I may not be able to. This might not be possible in Japan. I'm pretty sure that's the case. That's okay. I'm done with that because I've done it enough. I've gone alone enough. I don't need to do that anymore. Is it possible to will a place to become haunted? If so, then I suspect I succeeded this weekend during my visit to the desert ghost town of Siberia. The ghosts I made there are only as real as the emotions I used to create them. And they followed me away from that place when I returned home and will haunt my memory for as long as I live or care to recall. The ghosts will die with me, just like the prior passing of the real persons whose hidden history is their secret inspiration. But such is the way of hauntings, to derive from hinted facts, to then grow and live by imagination until the imaginer themselves becomes nothing more than a faint and shadowy impression, an indistinct suggestion of facts, a muse and inspiration to the imagination of generations yet to come. Damn, and I've left my place out there. I've got 4 stones out there that I left I didn't intend to do it, but I left them, and maybe they'll inspire someone else to think the same thoughts, a ghost of me. I like the idea of becoming an anonymous ghost. Here we go. Go with a friend to discover something you can share. Go alone to find something you may be unable to share. A stone wall is all that remains of the old railroad station at Siberia. The stones which make up the wall were pulled by the builders from the surrounding desert alluvium and represent well the long and diverse geologic history of the region. The stones include layered sedimentary rocks formed when this place was the bottom of a shallow sea. There's pink rhyolite which flowed from a nearby volcano. One stone includes coarse breccia from an ancient landslide or waterfall, while still another is a lovely conglomerate formed at the bottom of a deep pool at the end of a long series of rapids, perhaps in the age of dinosaurs. Though the wall itself represents very recent events in human history, the stones and sand of which it is made tell a much older and more interesting story. This same story is told by the desert itself, if only we have eyes to see. Warming my hands by this small fire, liar. I added the liar part. I'll tell you more. You'll get it later. Warming by the... I remember when I wrote this and I was like, liar, liar. Warming my hands by the small fire, the dark and vacant desert nights. This is probably the closest I come in this book to fiction. This is pure fiction, that fire. Warming my hands by this small fire, the dark and vacant desert night crowds close with its silent depth. There's little fuel left, just a few small sticks from someone else who's been here. Where are they now? There are no lights in the night. It seems I'm truly alone. But that's always been the case. Even in a crowd, my flame, like the flame of all others, burns at the discretion of just my attendants. The fuel is not the matter. There's plenty of that. It's the attendance and the effort I make to pile on more fuel and stir the coals. But now my arms grow weak, as they've been doing for years, and since about age 40. And my thoughts a little slow and stray, forgetful even, to tend the fire. That's why it's become so small. Just a dimming light in the infinite night. I'm tired now. It's time for a rest. I'll just lay down here on the soft sand. It's warm from the day which has already passed, a comforting reminder of the life that was. I'll just close my eyes a bit. The fire seems fine. I'm sure the coals will be glowing at dawn, will still be glowing at dawn. The night always ends well. That's what I've always said. There's a couple of Asian women, I think it's them. There's regulars here on the beach. I sometimes see these two women. If that's them, they're a little far off. I can't tell if it's them though. They'll pass by in a second. Consumed my mind in direct proportion to the distance moved. If I walked 5 miles, then my mind was never further than that same distance. No place then was really very wild, even though I sometimes went where I suspect nobody'd ever been. Desert miles stretch all out of proportion to distance. 5 miles or 50 are to the same effect. Even 50 yards can do the job when conditions are right. Lately, it seems I don't even need to go. Just remembering the desert is becoming enough. That never happened with the mountains, or the sea, or with solitude alone. I'm tempted to think the desert is coming for me, has me trapped in some way. But that's nonsense. Indifference doesn't care, is incapable of giving a damn. It's all in my mind. My vain attempt to hold on to what I've found, to gain some purchase in reality that might survive my passing. But the desert doesn't care, nor the mountains, nor solitude, though the desert voices this silence the loudest. I'm going to miss that too once I'm back in Japan. That great vocalization of indifference that you can get in the desert. Can't get it here. I mean there, in Japan. I'm starting to think of there as being here. Yeah, that's those two women. They're like fast friends. I see them often, not every time I come, but often walking together, and they just talk incessantly. That look on the old man's face, even though we were that look on the old man's face, even though we were both at a crowded mall, surrounded by effervescent living, a warm summer evening, crowds of young people living. Did he see the indifference? Was that why his gaze went past everyone into nothing? I think he did. He doesn't need the desert. He's almost there. I'll add, though, that I don't think that when that happened, that he was perceiving the indifference, which is just a thing I made up, of course. I think he was seeing the end of his life, beyond the end of his life, in whatever capacity that would be, and trying to reconcile that in some way. And I think a lot of people do that when they get to be about my age. I wrote recently of tending a campfire. However, it's been years since I've actually built one. See, I was the liar. I prefer now to let darkness come on its own when I'm alone in the wild. I'll use a light to set up camp or cook, or a flame to cook my meal, but when the camp is set and my stomach is full, I'll switch off the light and sit alone in the vast darkness, almost like before. I asked myself today why my thoughts so often turn to death and the related subjects of emptiness, indifference, and oblivion. It's because I enjoy life and I believe that there's nothing to follow after we die. I believe that what waits after death is the same utter void we didn't know before we were born. I believe all this love and laughter, challenge and struggle, and the many opportunities to be and to do good will pass away completely the instant our mind shuts off and our being begins to dissolve away. I believe there will be no chance for reunion, reconciliation, or justice after our functions cease. And I believe that we will never again wake into anything like what we are now, though our matter and energy may in fact be used by others. So, if this is what I believe, then I guess it's no wonder I spend a lot of time thinking about and gazing into the void. No wonder I go to wild places. That's why I choose the desert, and the reason I always go alone. For whenever I return from such places or such thoughts, I always come back a better man, more sober and composed, less troubled by petty things, more engaged with my family, more at ease with who I am, better resolved towards being a good man, and more prepared for the absolute end I must very soon face alone. So picturesque. Wow. They're getting it. Just one more week until the start of flash flood season in the California desert. Soon my dark and silent nights in Siberia will come alive with thunder, lightning, and rain in the nearby Bristol Mountains. These summer storms create powerful and short-lived rivers which appear suddenly from nowhere to spill from canyons and dissipate across the broad alluvial plain where I sleep. The floods carry heavy sediment loads, of course, rock and sand. The floods carry heavy sediment loads of coarse rock and sand, which are deposited atop the desert, adding new layers to a geologic story which began 34 million years ago, in a period when grasslands first appeared on Earth and rainforests retreated to the equator. The story goes on, year upon year, century after century, for countless millennia, with few observers and nobody to know the full tale. There are two types of swim into deep water that I enjoy in my life. The first is any solo adventure which stretches the bounds of safety and puts me beyond easy reach of help. I enjoy these experiences for the impression of frail vulnerability I gain whenever I am all alone with the great indifference and have no friend or comfort to turn to. The second swim into deep water is when I find some way to honestly undermine my own beliefs or anything else which I think is true. Sadly, this is becoming less easy now that I've killed so much of my worldview and am left with only a handful of I don't knows. It seems there's little existential threat to admitted ignorance, though there's lots of discomfort if you don't like not knowing and find yourself all alone with your doubt. But then that's where the first and second types of deep water meet, and where we enter the very deep water, the deep end of the ocean. The deep end of the ocean is where admitted ignorance and accepted indifference come together and cancel one another out. The very deep sea grows still here in the face of the fact that we don't really know the answer we might previously have thought so sure, while simultaneously recognizing that the universe does not, or is incapable of, giving a damn about our troubling dilemma. I don't get to swim in deep water very often, as life has a way of sending rescuers to such places to quickly extract and return us back to work, or to our friends, or our family, our church, bar, shopping mall, television, or anything else that gives us comforting suckle, while reassuring us that we are right and in fact not alone. So I'll take such swims as I can and when I'm able, and with a little luck I'll one day drown out there, far to sea, alone with my doubt, beyond any savior, trembling within the dark and indifferent depths above, below, and everywhere all around. That woman that just ran by in the pink, she's a regular too. The most disturbing thing about being alone in the desert isn't what you might find there, but what you won't. The volcanoes of the eastern Mojave Desert are largely extinct due to the way in which they were formed. Each cinder cone and lava dome in this region had its origin deep within the Earth's upper mantle. This geologic story begins roughly 100 miles northeast of the intersection of the North American and Pacific crustal plates, which forms the San Andreas Fault, where this fault crosses the San Bernardino Mountains at Cajon Pass. Though these plates are running laterally against one another, there is sufficient subduction of the Pacific plate to draw water-rich oceanic crust deep into the mantle below the North American plate. The introduction of water into the mantle at these depths lowers pressure such that large bubbles of hot magma form, which begin to rise up and into the Earth's solid crust. It's essentially the same process which causes bubbles to form in a bottle of pop after the cap is opened. These bubbles of molten rock burn their way slowly through miles of solid rock as they rise towards the surface, cooling, changing, and growing smaller as they go. Tens of thousands of years later, the molten bubbles of magma arrive at the surface as to pop, as small, short-lived volcanoes, or simply to bulge through the surface without popping, to form nicely symmetrical lava domes. While driving through the desert on Interstates 1540 or old Route 66, it's possible to see dozens of these extinct volcanoes and lava domes frozen at the moment of their death, when the last of their molten magma cooled upon reaching the surface of the Earth. We can even gauge how long their journey was by the color and texture of the rocks, with dark volcanoes rising more quickly than light-colored volcanoes which enjoyed a longer or slower trip from the molten mantle to the surface of the Earth. 48 hours until I leave again for Siberia. It's a swim into deep water out there at this time of year, even at night. A warm glide over unfathomed depths in every direction. Sometimes out there I distract myself with living. It's an easy trick which we learn from birth, but the game becomes so apparent the moment I falter in my play, like a man playing solitaire on a desert island who suddenly looks up and remembers his real situation. There are no conspirators when I am alone out there in the deep desert. Nobody to help keep up the game. No one to share the illusion. None at all out there. If you don't enjoy criticism, then don't attempt to swim alone in the deep desert. If you don't like being wrong, then remain at home with your costly peace and certitude. I'd accept no something in exchange for my nothing. The desert took it all away from me, including the space where it once all belonged. Whew, that's so true. I arrived at Siberia minutes after sundown and had only a short amount of time to set up camp before deep darkness enveloped the land. The only light or sound of humanity after nightfall here is the very rare passing of a vehicle on Route 66, or the commanding passage of a mile-long train moving up or down the Mojave Grade. The mountains to the south are 16 miles or 26 kilometers away. During summer thunderstorms, I sometimes see lightning in those mountains without hearing any sound of thunder. Silence and peace with every footstep and moment. Even now, the desert quiet is with me. This has nothing to do with the desert, really. Though without the deep desert, the spell might never have been broken. I used to worry that if I spent too much time alone out there, then I'd in some way never get back. Instead, what I found out there has seemingly become lost within me. It looks out through my eyes and sees the vast and terrible emptiness behind everything, reminding me to build and maintain sound principles of virtue, which are the tools and apparatus of a good and meaningful life. It hushes my mind with quiet when life rustles with demand, helping me to focus and attend to my responsibility as well as the true ends of virtue. I see the nothing which awaits after life is done, which fact compels me to act now in the name of virtue and the improved well-being of my fellows, as well as the well-being of those yet to come. I used to think I'd someday lose myself in the desert, though I never guessed I'd be lost until the desert indifference became lost in me. "90-minute countdown to departure for Siberia. I wonder if that fear I always meet along the way is waiting now to ambush me. It usually lurks out past Ludlow, not far from Pisgah Crater on the right side of Route 66. When the fear comes, it always tracks me close beside the road, easily shadowing the big bike as I roll and glide through the black lava fields. In winter, it's dark already when I arrive, so I can't see, but I know it's there. In summer, like now, it seems to move stealthily among the rocks while waiting for nightfall, which approaches fast from the east. The fear does something to me about 3 miles from Siberia, where I always want to turn back. Haven't yet, but who knows tonight. Turning in on the dirt road to the Siberia ruins, I have more turning in onto the dirt road to the Siberia ruins, I have more important and real worries to attend to, as navigating a 600-pound motorcycle on a dirt road is real fear enough to dispel any mere phantom. Once I arrive and shut off the bike, the fear is gone. It wasn't like that the first or even the second time I went, when I cowered in the car with the doors locked, staring out at the dark. Gosh, I remember that. I felt like such a kid then. It's a wonder I went back. No more though, when the bike's engine stopped and the desert silence swarms in, all fear, every last bit, drains away. Boy, that's true, and that's even more so now. I don't go out to the desert anymore, but if I did, I know that would be the case. Have I arrived in Siberia, or has Siberia arrived in me? Greetings from Siberia. It's dark now and big. This place is so big. As I sit here on the hot, dark sand, I think I figured something out. I know now why this place can't get me, why I'm not afraid here anymore, why the solitude in the night and the indifference can't take me away, though it's got me now and there's nowhere to run. It's because I'm connected, deeply connected, to my wife and my daughter and my brother and my mom, and to the others too. I try hard with my family and I do a pretty good job, I think. Not so much the others. It's my failing, one of many. These connections, though, do the trick, I think. They keep me safe here, prevent my mind from wandering to places from which it might never return. In 1989, I left my girlfriend, now my wife, behind in a small college town near the Oregon border, where I embarked on while I embarked on a great life adventure. I made it as far as the desert. In fact, not far from where I am now, just over the Bristol Mountains to the northwest, near the west shore of Soda Dry Lake. Something happened to me then which caused me to properly return to Yumiko. I gave up the desert then. I knew I was about to go too far into the wild. Not physically, but that other way. I sensed then, quite rightly, that if I'd continued then, I'd never have made it back. I was right. I know that now. Now I'm back in the desert, 28 years later. The same threat looms here like before. I can sense it, but I'm not afraid. It can't get me. I'm too strong now. Though my body is weak, my spirit, resolve, and hard-won maturity are more than a match for the great indifference. Not so in my youth. If I'd stayed, then I would have surely been consumed. Maybe a heartfelt warning to anyone young who might attempt to find the great indifference. It's dangerous. I don't expect to remember life. Every swim into deep water comes at a price. The cost is the genuine quality of our connection with those we've left behind. For as the universe expands without them, we find we've less to relate and have fewer common connections. That's why we so often choose society over solitude, institutions over independence, and the status quo over the strange and the unknown. Venture too far or too long into deep water and we risk losing sight of shore. The place where you swim then is very real. It just won't seem so to others. And the things you describe, well, perhaps it's better you just keep those things to yourself. Enjoy your society, relish your institutions, abide the status quo if it be good and just and of virtue. Just don't forget where you've been and what you've seen. At one point during my hike in the desert today, I took refuge from the heat under a bridge where Route 66 crosses a desert wash. I found a Japanese book under the bridge. The book describes a round-the-world bicycle journey, handwritten Japanese writing on the back of the book read, "I will not die far from home. I will make it back alive." Yumiko tells me the writing is a man's handwriting and the language in a style of the Kansai region of Japan. My book should draw like vacuum and drain like death. Take another with you if all you want is adventure. Life can pass easy that way, though I suspect at times you'll wonder if there's more. There isn't. Which is an awful fact. Quick, cover it up with distraction. Turn back to the comfort of friends. Clasp your hands in prayer. Keep yourself company with the sound of your own voice. Just don't go alone unless you really want to sing. Though I missed the mark yesterday in the desert, failed to disconnect, failed to become lost, I did, however, find trace of someone else's success. That Japanese man who left his book beneath our Route 66 bridge. The boldly scribbled note he left at the back of the book. There's no doubt he met the great indifference. It's not just in my mind. It's really not out there. I see these women sometimes too. So many regulars today. My goal from last weekend's hike was to safely explore how many hours I could hike into the day after sunrise and before things started to get dangerous. The answer is about 4 hours. On a day when temps will max out at around 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 C. But that was with 3 stops to rest under various flash flood bridges beneath the railroad tracks on Route 66. These stops were crucial to bring my body temperature down, as there is absolutely no other shade in the open desert to use for this purpose. If I hadn't had those bridges to rest under, I think the hike could have been only 2 hours or less. I could literally feel my body temperature rising like a kettle on the stove while walking exposed to the direct sunlight. This was especially true after 9 a.m. The experience was rather alarming, and I definitely would not want to be caught an hour or more from camp during summer anytime after 9 a.m. I must keep that summertime hiking to either nighttime or just a few hours after dawn. A very good lesson. I found what's possibly another lost grave belonging to the desert town of Siberia. The only reason I even guess it's a grave is because it matches so well with graves I've seen in other ghost towns along Route 66. This collection of arranged stones is located just a short way out from where the town used to be. It's formed of hastily arranged stones and can seemingly serve no other useful purpose. Wooden crosses or headstones were commonly used on graves like this, though desert winds take their toll on such markers, and many graves I've seen are today missing their wooden markers and remain just a pile of outline of stones. I was a little delirious with the heat when I found this, and I'm afraid I probably couldn't find it again if I tried. I don't think I could. Any chance. I'm following that mysterious stone-lined desert path which runs from nowhere to nowhere within the desert ghost town of Siberia. This path has become a companion of sorts for me whenever I come here, as I always seem to stumble upon it during my nighttime walks, and I still find new traces of it when I meander about in the morning drinking my coffee. Invariably, my mind always wonders about the hands which so carefully placed these. I wish I had the courage to write all of the words. I'd have thought it would be easier that way out here. Maybe after I lose sight of land, maybe only after I toss the compass over the side. Route 66 camp at Siberia, California. It's summer now, and already I feel the intensity of the sun as it crawls up slowly towards the horizon. The solar heat literally spills out over the mountains before the sun can even be seen. It's like feeling the first trickle of a heat flood which is about to engulf the desert. I get a little anxious in this hour of the day, and I tend to work fast to break camp and ready the motorcycle for a hasty retreat. The radiant heat energy of the desert is astounding, and there is absolutely nowhere to hide besides the shade under railroad and highway bridges, which I sometimes share with birds and jackrabbits. It's no wonder most of the animal life out here is nocturnal, hiding away from the sun at dawn just before the inferno switches on. Walking alone across the desert on a summer day can be a very lonesome experience. Where is everyone? Why are all the locals hiding? What do they know that I don't seem to grasp? Ready to depart the California-Siberia desert, the night before was especially hot, only cooling to a comfortable level just before dawn. I ate my dinner while seated on the gravelly dirt, covered in sweat, wondering about male tarantulas which wander actively through the summer night looking for females. Though the wind was gentle this particular night, I did take precaution to lash the tent securely to the ground with pegs and ropes, and to angle the tent with the narrow side facing east and west, which align the tent perpendicularly to the night wind, which can sometimes rise suddenly to blow with great intensity for hours through the night. Desert night winds, unless due to a storm, nearly always blow into the desert, which means west to east at Siberia, which fact allows me to reliably prepare my tent to weather the blast should it come. The night here is quiet in every season except the trains. The night is quiet here in every season except the trains, which literally blast through the dark with deep rumbling engines, which shake the ground in resonant whistle blasts which echo off the black volcanoes. The stars also remain constant in every season, even when the Bristol and Bullion Mountains to the north and south are being drenched in summer thunderstorms. The air overhead at Siberia is nearly always clear and clean all the way to the Milky Way. Just satellites mar the view, or an occasional jetliner, strangely silent, remind me of my species. It's a good thing. Such solitude. So much is lost then, so little gained. A very equitable trade. Eventually I won't need the desert, or the silence, or the stillness, or the atmosphere of peace. Maybe then I'll understand the reason Emerson wrote that the wise man stays at home. With today's outing, I was experimenting with how long I could remain exposed and moving out in the open desert on a day when temps would top out at around 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 C. I learned that I don't want to be more than an hour away from shade after approximately 8 a.m. I could probably extend that range by wearing more and better quality clothing, as it seems it really isn't the exposure. It seems it's really the exposure to direct sunlight which drives my body temperature up fast, rather than the simple fact of being outdoors. The sunlight hitting my exposed skin seems to transfer an astonishing amount of heat energy, which might otherwise be blocked or deflected by a sensible layer of clothing. I'm planning to research desert clothing solutions in use by desert-dwelling people in places like Africa and the Middle East for some tips and tricks to help keep me safe. Another idea is to carry some form of easy-to-assemble shelter which I can quickly erect as a hiding place from the sun. I'm thinking perhaps of using a large reflective space blanket, secured to the ground with pegs and elevated with a short pole. For this journey, I was using a very nice shady area beneath flash flood bridges along both the railroad and Route 66. I'm certain I could easily spend an entire day under one of these bridges during even the hottest desert days. However, a small shelter like my proposed space blanket tent would likely offer far less cooling opportunity, and I'd need to experiment carefully with such options. An extra concern is the fact that since I'm on a motorcycle, there's no chance to escape the heat in a pinch by ducking into a car to enjoy the air conditioning. This means that I must always plan to get back to my bike with enough exposure reserves, new term perhaps, to get the big GSA motorcycle fired up safely down the dirt road from Siberia and out onto Route 66, where I can enjoy the moderately cooling effect of a 60-mile-per-hour wind. Altogether, I am very satisfied with this experiment, though I think the heat may have made me a bit delirious at times. I'm beginning to assemble some going alone best practices, suggestions for anyone interested in entering wildness alone in search of the great indifference. Of course, the first trick is knowing that you don't need to go to wildness to encounter indifference. You simply need to see past the thin veneer of meaning and illusory permanence we so expertly smear over everything and everyone around us. So here's a couple of points. Point 1, go alone, but return to someone you love. Reject all company in the wild. Reject even the desire to consult yourself. Let every new outing put yet another mile between you and everything that comforts and reassures your mind. With time, what you've left behind will be like a distant carnival of stimulation and distraction, a loud, brilliant spectacle of days leading to a fearful end few dare honestly consider or discuss. But beware going too far, too soon, or too young. For it is possible to go so distant into wildness that you can never get back, even if you find your way back. Point 2, go alone, but find love in your life. Find a partner who will understand and who will be comfortable with you going to the wild alone. Someone to come back to, someone who will leave a light on for you for your return, and who will warm you with their embrace when you reach out longingly to hold them after you've returned. Someone to appreciate after you've seen what's not really out there. It's not necessary that this person share your interest in such solitude or understand your reasons. It's enough that they accept this part of who you are and do not dissuade your reasonable pursuit of going alone. So when dating, be upfront about this thing you do. Tell your potential partner about your practice of sometimes going alone to places off the map. While dating, engage in going alone. Mark the calendar with your scheduled outings and describe your plans. Consider wisely if this person cannot tolerate your solitary bent and trajectory. I'll include now a quote to illustrate my point about partnering with someone who can help us stay grounded, though I hesitate doing so for fear this quote might be misunderstood. I'm not adding this to suggest the poet should necessarily find a non-poet or more domestic soul to share their life with, but only to point out what others have observed and which my own experience has borne witness. Let me share then a short passage from Nathaniel Hawthorne's extraordinary novel, The House of the Seven Gables, my favorite book of all time. In this particular section of the book, we learn about the platonic relationship between the old man Clifford and his young niece Phoebe. Clifford being of the poetic sort and someone lost to the world in a reality he can neither share nor make very real, and Phoebe, a young woman of grounded sentiment made buoyant of her youth, practicality, and common sense. Phoebe brings a peace and fulfillment to Clifford's life, which is all out of proportion to anything he could offer the girl, though she does gain somewhat through the administration of her native charity and benevolence. The benefit of relations between the two is quite one-sided due to Clifford's advanced age and degraded mental prowess, though perhaps if he'd had someone like Phoebe in his youth, he might not have become so very lost, and she might too have gained from the unique qualities and gifts Clifford might have been in a better position to share. Here's the quote from the book. Now Phoebe's presence made a home about her, that very sphere which the outcast, the prisoner, the potentate, the wretch beneath mankind, the wretch aside from it, or the wretch above it instinctively pines after. A home. She was real. Holding her hand, you felt something, a tender something, a substance, and a warm one. And so long as you should feel its grasp, soft as it was, you might be certain that your place was good in the whole sympathetic chain of human nature. The world was no longer a delusion. By looking a little further in this direction, we might suggest an explanation of an oft-suggested mystery. Why are poets so apt to choose their mates, not for any similarity of poetic endowment, but for qualities which might make the happiness of the rudest handicraftsman as well as that of the ideal craftsman of the spirit? Because probably at his highest elevation, the poet needs no human intercourse, but he finds it dreary to descend and be a stranger. Nathaniel Hawthorne. I think he really nailed it right there. And if you look over and over again, you'll find that same sympathetic poet relationship between the poet and the non. Step 3, no campfire. Let the night come on its own terms. Sit alone on the hard ground or let darkness arrive. Walk blind into the night, stumble and fall, and meet the fearful things you imagine are there. Return to your campsite both master and mastered. 4, no seat. Never bring any chair into the wild, nor create a seat. Just sweep away with your bare hand the larger stones and then sit on the ground or in the sand or on a rock, or better yet, stand and move always. 5, find a desert. Go someplace hard and empty. Avoid places with soft grass on the ground or green leafy trees for shade. Find somewhere where no one goes. Find a place hot or cold or windy or bleak. A place where life isn't easy or welcome, where existence is hard, where you perceive threat in the empty. 6, no connectivity. Switch off the device and then never turn it back on. Or if your muse is catalyzed by sharing, then make the effort one way. Avoid checking or responding while in the wild, or better yet, ever. Avoid curating both your experience and your life. 7, no books. You know better. Leave the books at home. Though bring blank pages and a pencil. Or your blog. Do these things if you discover your muse meets you out there in the wastes. Listen and record what you hear then. Don't be embarrassed to share, though you'll likely be looked at and thought of as increasingly odd if you do so honestly. I will amend that. I'll say that now, those days are over. These days are over for me. I can bring a book now. I don't need to wait anymore. I don't need to. I'm okay with the distraction now. 8. This is the last point. Consider death at first light. Greet the dawn by imagining your own death and the death of your loved ones and the eternity of utter empty to follow for each of you. Imagine that you'll never again see the ones you love, nor they you. Never again experience any thought or emotion. Ask yourself how you should best spend the coming day, cognizant how few days really remain and how much you will very soon utterly lose when this life is done. I'm gearing up now for today's ride and overnight at Siberia. The temperature forecast is 109 degrees or 43 C and 113 or 45 C for tomorrow. I always lose more in the desert than I gain. I wonder how much less there will be of me after I return. I wonder what part of me will evaporate away today and tomorrow in the heat and the empty. I have a home. I have a wife. I have a daughter. And I have an extended family. And I have a place called Siberia. It's someplace that reminds me that the universe doesn't care. It's a place that threatens without acknowledging my presence. Its silence deafens my every hope and ambition. I become almost nothing here for a night and then a day before I go back to my wife and my daughter and my family and my life. And I resolve then to make purpose and meaning where there is none, to identify virtue and make it my friend, and to vow allegiance to what is true and to deny what is false, and to live a good life, a life of meaning, a life of love, a life well lived. I'm embarking on my first solo night hike in the desert. It's dark out there, and I have no reliable way to find my way back to the ghost town without lights or any sign of life. I won't go far this time, just until I can no longer touch bottom. The temperature today was around 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 C, with a gentle yet very hot wind blowing in from the west. It's hard to describe well the emptiness out here at night with just my little pen light providing a dull haze of illumination in an ocean of black. The locomotives do thunder through from time to time, yet they seem as indifferent to my meek presence here as the night and the heat. I think it's their steel rails which insulate the occupants from the fearful reality which swims here in the night. A lot of me evaporated away into the hot desert night during this hike. I'm discovering that the stuff that goes wasn't necessary anyway. Each time I go to the desert, I return with less, and I'm a better man for the loss, more deliberate, more sincere, less distracted, lighter in every way. The desert quiet is everywhere with me now. Everything slower, silence deep within the mind. Desert skies offer little impediment to elevated thought without clouds. Oh, hi, puppy. Or much insulating humidity between the earth and the vacuum. Let me try that one again. Desert skies offer little impediment. Desert skies offer little impediment to elevated thought without. Try this again. Desert skies offer little impediment to elevated thought. Without clouds or much insulating humidity between the earth and the vacuum of space, my thinking floats up easily and away from whatever might otherwise restrain and constrain it upon the firm bedrock of convention. If I float my ideas high enough, I can no longer make out the ground. Everything becomes a vast landscape of indifference. There's little difference in any direction. Even the deep dark above yawns awesome and deep. similar infinity below towards the ground and around me on every side. I'm increasingly mute whenever I return. There seems little reason to share what I can barely find words to describe. There will be just a sliver of moon 2 days hence when I arrive at Siberia. The moon will hang low in the west just after I arrive at sunset. Within 2 hours, this faint source of light will pass over the horizon, leaving deep night until dawn, a darkness not even the abundant starlight can awaken. I'll walk then alone into the desert, a flashlight to guide the way, all inner light extinguished through a force of will to fit in. I'm at the edge of the desert now. Terrible heat. Awful, really. I've been exposed now for hours. So much has been drained from me. I'm counting the remaining hours now to sunset, anticipating some relief after the sun goes down. I like life this way. I enjoy looking over the awful edge of oblivion. After 9 months and 4 attempts, I was at last able yesterday to get a San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputy to the desert location where I discovered what I thought were human bones. 3 deputies agreed, and the bones are now on their way to the coroner. Have you ever smelled the odor of a rock? This is something I've only ever experienced in the deep East Mojave Desert, in the low, crumbling ruins of the ancient Bristol and Bullion Mountains, among the island peaks of the Old Dad and Old Woman Mountains, and at the rugged and exposed feet of the Great Providence and Granite Mountains. The smell of stone here can only be detected through the hottest days of summer, and only just after sundown when the faint twilight grows and a swell of gratitude emerges that we've survived another inferno day. The exposed stones here are the ancient product of a collision of continents, white, red, and black in color, rich in silicon and iron. It's the iron we can seemingly smell. It's the same odor of our own fresh and copious blood, the taste of a bloody nose. Something about the long hot day and the sudden cessation of heat when the sun goes down appears to draw this same faint odor from the stones, from the landscape itself. It's a beautiful smell while it lasts, strangely familiar, wildly unexpected, as exotic and evocative as a rare perfume. Don't expect this aroma of iron from the forest or the sea or the desert sands. It's a product of bare and exposed and ancient desert mountains, a factor of deep heat and sudden cooling and the relief of survival and the promise of night and the chance of another day. I often like to compare my desert outings to a swim in the sea. In wintertime, a walk into the desert is like a leisurely swim into deep water from a calm and serene shoreline. It isn't until you're very far out that it dawns on you how deep, black, and cold the water below is, and how distant the shimmering shore. In summertime, though, a walk into the desert is like playing in the surf on a day when heavy wind and waves pound upon the shore. There's trepidation from the first step and danger even before we're over our heads in apparent death. Summer is like a storm upon the desert, a raging tempest of heat which drives nearly all life to the cover of shade, or to flee altogether until the storm's autumn end. To swim, then, is to risk death in short order, to drown in the heat, to die with bulging eyes and swollen tongue, stumbling naked towards a shimmering mirage, to become parched and bleached bones upon the sand. Woo, the water almost came up to here. The winter desert kills with cold indifference. Its cold daylight silence lures us too far from where we should turn back. The comfort is a vain illusion, just a little further. I'll go just past that ridge. The atmosphere is so mild and comforting at mid-afternoon, the sunset coming on. Shall I stop and watch? Nightfall, the onset of sudden deep cold. Which way back? no lights, no trail, no guide. A final evening, the start of an endless night. There was a storm raging all about me during today's hike, invisible for the clear, clean atmosphere, the dead air, and the deceptive desert silence, yet apparent in my beet red face, detectable in the real and rising anxiety of my fast words and the growing delirium evident in my odd topics of conversation and the distracted nature of my discourse with the camera. I'd been exposed in the open sun in temperatures of 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43°C, for over 2 hours, and the heat stress was really beginning to take its toll. I remember thinking, while I walked to hide under a Route 66 bridge, how I was perhaps getting near to someplace bad with regard to my bodily condition, getting close to someplace I shouldn't want to go. Yet curiosity urged me to continue just a little further when I soon left the shelter of the bridge to inch just a bit nearer the edge of heat stroke and the one-way vista beyond. There's something deeply satisfying about tempting danger in this way. I suspect it's the same feeling others get when they drive very fast or swim with sharks or climb without ropes. A deep invigoration and appreciation of life which comes of every near miss of life's final and utterly conclusive end. The season of heat is passing. Temperatures today in the East Mojave Desert won't climb past 100 degrees or 38°C until mid-afternoon. A mild day by recent standards. Soon, the sun will relent its terrible onslaught of energy upon the land, not by nature of diminished output, but by only through the gradual shortening of days and indirect angle of attack. I can already feel the coming change, anticipate the cooler evenings and the crisp bite of midnight cold, which is herald of the much deeper and colder winter nights to come. There isn't much time between seasons here, barely a chance to rest a moment and prepare for the next season's atmosphere and inclination. Spring and autumn are bliss here, though the memory and forecast of what was and what's to come dull all but the most senseless immediate regard. Age 53, and my mental faculties are both optimally tuned and failing fast. The experience of operating this system is like piloting an airplane through a range of mountains. I can't possibly summit. With each passing year of life, the canyons narrow and the valleys rise. There's no going back, and time's running out. I'd better do my thinking now before this journey very soon ends as a smoldering stain upon a high alpine cliff. There is great virtue in self-destruction. By this I do not mean self-harm or injury in any way to our well-being or our innate sense of happiness. In fact, I seek to increase these greatly, to rarefy goodness and find immediate and sound answers to life's most challenging issues and questions. I do this through destruction, self-destruction to be exact. I attempt this destruction daily, usually in the morning just before sunrise. I do this by throwing everything of real value upon the fire. Not a scrap of sentiment should remain. I start the fire with a sincere question: are these things real? I then heap on the fuel of criticism, blow the flames with puffs of objectivity, lay on abundant dry honesty, and then watch the new day's inferno rage. I don't do this anymore, by the way. What's left in the embers are the little bits of truth I'll carry for another day. These are my treasures now, not those combustible ideas of dogma, tradition, and authority. I've burned them down again, as I will again tomorrow and the day after that. My secret goal is to one day have nothing left to burn, to be forced to go a day in utter doubt and confusion. Oh, what a blessing to walk in the company of an ignorance hard-earned of education and lost utterly to fearless, naked doubt. I used to be afraid of the dark. I used to be afraid of the desert for impractical reasons. I was afraid of the dark and the solitude and the questions which lurked there. These fears have largely passed. Now I'm afraid of more practical things, like the heat and the cold and the risk of going very far while very alone. But also, there's a new and very different fear that's rising. I began to sense it just recently, perhaps truly during this last outing 2 weeks back. It's a sense of the perception of a pathway emerging before me, an invisible route of my own making, a way opening up which I know I will follow. I don't fear this direction for any reason other than I know that passage is one way and utterly irrevocable. So it has turned out to be. 48 hours till Siberia. I'll arrive half an hour after sunset. It'll be dark then. I'm thinking perhaps I'll leave the motorcycle at the ghost town ruins and night hike immediately after I arrive. Instead of packing my motorcycle with camping gear, I'll prepare my 3-day tactical bag and wear it while riding all the way out to the desert. This is easy to do, and I can simply loosen the pack's shoulder strap and allow the bike's pillion seat to carry the pack's full weight. This way, when I arrive, I simply get off the bike, tighten the straps, and start walking into the dark. For this hike, I'll go perhaps a mile north from Siberia into the near edge of the deep water wilderness. This will be my first real overnight in the desert and away from the reassuring touch of civilization in over 3 decades. A homecoming of sorts. The last time I did a desert night hike like this, I was very young. I remember that night very well. I remember emerging from my tent deep in the night to admire the rising moon. I remember the warm, empty promise of the desert night wind. I remember feeling so small and frail, standing naked and barefoot on the sand in the vast and empty night. The great dark desert illuminated with faint, pale moonlight. The only man on earth, it seemed. It's possible my nihilism can be traced to this moment or moments like this. There were many then. I wonder how my much older mind will react to this same experience 48 hours from now. Things are very different now. I'm a family man now. I have solid life objectives now. I have sound principles now. I have deeply meaningful purpose now. I know and recognize the great indifference now. I don't fear the empty. Death is a wondrous, perhaps utterly final mystery for me now. I no longer pretend I've outthought death's mystery, and I no longer pledge allegiance to any comforting story of forever. I now instead await and welcome whatever strange, wondrous, or terrible reality really awaits. I think I'm ready for whatever I'll now find or not find in the night. There's always lightning here during the summer at night at Siberia. It's in the east and in the north. Ever seen, never heard. Never heard. There was an enormous dust storm racing across the desert towards me. I was scrambling to set up and secure my tent before the storm arrived. The initial winds were intense, nearly knocking the tent flat before blotting out the remaining sun and ushering in the start of a long, hot, gritty night. The dust storm hit my desert camp before I could finish pounding in the last tent stakes, flapping the loose tent madly while minute particles of dust clouded the sun and irritated my eyes. The wind blew hard for several hours at the start of night, while I alternated resting and walking about the dark camp. I was too hot to remain in the tent. It was too hot to remain in the tent, too windy to cook a meal or relax, too soon for sleep. The wind eventually stopped, the dust passed or settled into the dark, the stars came out, still too hot to sleep well. I bound the tent flaps open to invite in the night breeze as well as scorpions, tarantula, and snakes. I lay naked upon the floor of the tent, nothing to sleep on or covering me, just the soft, hot sand below and the dehydrating hot wind above, blowing heat all about and over every inch of my body. I slept then, not well, not deep. Night thoughts rose in my mind between dream and consciousness. I tended these like a small, fragile flame when I could, when my mind rose far enough from sleep to realize I was thinking. I let all those quiet night thoughts go. I can't remember a one now. They were ghosts in the night. I slept then, not well, not deep. Night thoughts rose in my mind between dream and consciousness. I tended these like a small, fragile flame when I could, when my mind rose far enough from sleep to realize I was thinking. I let all those quiet night thoughts go. I can't remember a one now. They were ghosts in the night. I'm awake now. It's another hour before dawn. The morning wind woke me with a long and sudden blast of heat. I expect this is how the desert anticipates the summer day to come, an anxiety of mindless natural force. The desert around me is so dark and empty, only the wind, my companion, and the stars, a distant, mute audience. This night I'll remember always, a fitting candidate for the someday smile on an old man's face, my grandchildren wondering, why does Granddad smile that way? Sweat and life evaporate equally out here. The lull and comfort of civilization and companionship dull my perception of life's immediate passing. The tick of seconds will never get back. We will never get back. Don't think such thoughts. Here, amuse yourself with the TV or watch a movie. How about a meal or a drink or a chat with friends? There's no such distraction out here. Just the locomotives' determined passing, blind to anything other than their rails. I can't help sense time's passage here, feel the very weight of age. My muscles seem to fade with each step. That distant peak, possible yesterday, impossible today, not even a dream tomorrow. Each moment, less and less. It didn't escape my notice that the desert dust storm I encountered 2 nights back encompassed the deep water wilderness. Before the wind and sand swallowed me up where I camped on the gently sloping alluvial plain near Siberia, I watched as the storm front passed quickly across the edge of deep water, 1 mile to the north of my camp. This means the dust storm swept up and through first the twisting red canyons of deep water and then along the craggy black volcanic mountains leading to the heart of the desolate Bristol Range. From within those mountains, someone would never see such a storm approaching. The experience of such a sandstorm within the mountains would be both sudden and overwhelming. Immediately prior, the air would be still, the sky would be clear, the desert as silent as always. And then suddenly a brown wall and wave of wind would appear over the ridge and up the canyon. Anyone walking or setting up camp there would be consumed in seconds by wind and sand, left standing or hunkering against the sandblast gale. Eyes covered by hands, mouth tight, mind racing. And as these storms often come at twilight, the person caught so exposed would also be subject to sudden nightfall as the sand snuffs out the setting sun, ushering in a long, harsh twilight. Almost got up to eat the tent of the camera. I wonder how often the desert explorers and miners of old encountered such storms. The only story I've ever read of such an event relates a 100-year-old tale of an old miner who was caught suddenly by a sandstorm in the same general area where I was camping 2 nights back. In fact, he was a few miles southeast at the edge of the Amboy Crater lava field, attempting the long walk from Baghdad to 29 Palms, where he would attempt to sell various items he'd collected from the mines. He was an old man and got by any way he could. I suspect the sandstorm he met rose up from the same dry lake bed where my storm was born. The miner was overwhelmed by the storm, just as I was, and sought shelter in a lava tube, while I found refuge in a tent. While waiting out the wind and sand, he discovered large chunks of gold in the lava. The story goes that he took enough gold to fill a Bull Durham bag. with plans to return for the rest. Sadly, the old miner was dead within 24 hours of his return to Baghdad, and the gold he brought back was used to pay his funeral expense. I expect these sandstorms have been a feature of the desert here for tens of thousands of years. Now that I know of them and know what to look for and expect, I'll anticipate the day I'm once again suddenly enveloped in a long, blustery, gritty night of blowing sand and howling winds. I'll relish the chance and prepare my mind for the opportunity. "4 weeks back, and my overnight at Siberia was a brutal affair. The ground had absorbed a great deal of energy from sunlight, which it then radiated into the cooling night air from sundown until well past midnight. Sleep was very difficult then, as sweat pooled on the bottom of my tent and I tossed and turned until 3 a.m. I arose at dawn thoroughly dehydrated and fully sapped of all energy. The prospect of facing sunrise and the broiling day to come was daunting then, and I hastily broke camp in favor of a full retreat to my cool and comfortable home on the coast. 2 weeks later, on August 11th, and the story was different. Temperatures were 5 degrees cooler and the earth was losing its collective daytime heat fast after sundown. This was due to an unexpected sandstorm which rose suddenly at dusk, with winds that seemingly drained the earth of heat before the long summer twilight was complete. I slept better then, save for the clamor of wind rattling my tent and the grit of sand blowing in through open flaps, as well as the bite of some desert creepy crawly which clambered into bed with me from the dark. When I awoke the next day at dawn, the planet was in halcyon spirits, and I wondered if summer had somehow gone. The air temperature was cool, and atmosphere refreshingly clear after the long night of blowing sand. I stepped out of my tent into a pale light beneath a still ebony sky. The stars were gone in anticipation of the dawn. Day and night hung then in perfect balance. My fear of the desert was gone then too. I even contemplated the 1-mile hike to the edge of deep water. The desert had fooled me. The desert had me fooled. Not deliberately, of course. There's far too much indifference here to support any malice. I was fooled by circumstance and the natural confluence of events and the quality and character of that particular morning's climate and my own foolish trust of a clockwork universe of ever-descending consequence. I was slow to break camp then. I lured myself to complicit peace and a quiet and settled attitude. Suddenly, the heat returned with force. It was about 30 minutes after those beams first touched my skin after sunlight spilled over the Bristol Mountains. I felt my internal temperature begin to rise, rising faster than sweat could control. Besides, I was thoroughly dehydrated from the dry night wind. There wasn't enough moisture in me to mount an effective thermal defense. I was losing the battle even before it really began. A little panic then, a little haste. I broke camp quickly and was on my motorcycle and moving along Route 66 in no time. That felt good. I was keeping the rising desert heat at bay through the wind of my ride and the false sense of safety that our contraptions sometimes provide. I stopped the bike once to admire a distant bahia and another time to cast a melancholy gaze at the nothing that was once the ghost town of Baghdad. Neither time did I get off the bike. Neither time did I stop the engine. There's too much risk in either action. Just keep moving. Forget about the heat. About 10 miles from my camp at Siberia, I saw the low, black profile of a volcanic cinder cone called Amboy Crater, and my route began taking me past the crater's miles of hardened black lava. This is a particularly hot place, hotter than the surrounding desert. This is due to the black rocks, which absorb heat to such an extent that you cannot touch them with bare skin, which radiate this heat all day and night in great waves upon the land. This area is one of the origin places for the great winds which drive the sandstorms here, an origin place for many indifferent desert things. On a whim, I decided to pull into Amboy, here comes the water again, into Amboy Crater at the Bureau of Land Management's narrow, one-lane paved road leading into the National Monument. I knew there were covered picnic tables by the trailhead, which is the start of the 2-mile walk to the crater's summit. I thought I'd rest a bit in the shade, readying myself for the long 200-mile ride home to the coast. I woke an hour later to utter silence, the same midsummer daytime silence, which, whoa, the water's right here. The same midsummer daylight silence which speaks volumes in the desert. There was nobody around when I'd arrived. Nobody came while I lay nearly naked on the concrete in the shade, ants clambering over my body, displaying the same open indifference I know so well here. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, which squinted bloodshot and red, still stinging from the night's blowing sand. Why do I do this, I asked myself. Why do I come to such places? No answer was needed. The silence was answer enough. I didn't think anything more, though I did write a short bit of prose then. I've copied it below. It's about the heat and the cold, the twin killers as I called them. Here's what I wrote. There's an invisible killer prowling the entirety of the desert on a schedule, both predictable and unposted. It swallows everyone and everything at once, and begins squeezing until we're either dead or its time for departure has come. It will come again tomorrow, a little sooner or later, depending on the season. It disappears for some months while its less dangerous fraternal twin takes its station. There's a short season of overlap when both twins can be met on the same day, though never at the same hour. Remember that these killers cannot be seen, are soundless, have no mind, and are utterly without mercy. 6 hours later, I was home, safe with my wife and daughter, enjoying a long, cool swim in the pool. 24 hours after I left Amboy Crater, a husband and wife from Los Angeles drove into the same empty parking lot. I'm sure nobody else was there. They probably parked their car in the same spot where I'd parked my motorcycle, which was the most convenient location in the lot, close to both the shelter of the covered picnic benches and the trailhead. At around 11 a.m. At about around 11 a.m., the couple set out for the crater. By 2 p.m., both were dead. One reason few people remain in the desert very long is the dawning awareness that arises here that no legacy or memory can stay intact in such a hostile and dangerous place. Everything dies in the desert. Everything fades to dust and sand. Nothing remains or returns like it was before. Elsewhere, in more mild climes, the fact of our growing and extended circles of family and friends and the seeming permanence of what we've made or done in our lives lead us to believe that the results of our life efforts will last and maybe even survive for a while beyond our own passing. We imagine our work will stand for a time as a humble monument to our brief existence here. We're comforted we won't soon be forgotten, that after death our name won't quickly become disconnected from the individual we once were, that anonymity will not sweep over us as it does every man and every woman and every child who was and who is no longer and who no longer is, that we won't at last become nothing more than a fading name scratched along with some dates onto cut stones in a graveyard of forgotten someones. Old age and death are less fearful then, as we fooled ourselves that our work will last for a while upon the earth, while our spirit will then go on to exist forever in heaven or hell. Such a curious equanimity, such a deceitful peace. Deserts offer no such peace. Deserts remind us that we are sand and wind and heat, animated for a while, alive for just another day. They inform us we have no soul. They tell us that death is no more than a return to the nothing we were so long before life. And deserts say these things without words. speaking facts through mute and stark example, caring not if we listen or comprehend, incapable of carrying even, emptiness their first and final word. This is why few who come long in the desert. This is why few who come remain long in the desert. This is why we come and then go so quickly. There's only so much we can take of such a place, only so much we can stand before we run back to our loved ones, return to those who share our myths and stories and tales and promise of comfort, permanence, and peace, to tell ourselves that what we've begun to suspect out there in the desert isn't really true, to hold our hands to our ears and close our eyes, to speak reassuring words of forever, to talk of final reunion and final reconciliation and final justice, to speak again of forever and again, and then again, to talk of someday mansions in the clouds and a just lawgiver who will love us forever and joy to last for eternity. We leave the desert to escape the denial of such comfort. We leave the desert to forget the sand, to forget the silence and the heat and the empty and the utter indifference of a universe that truly does not seem to care, and the awesome implication these discovered facts suggest may be true. The peaceful corridors of the mind. I'll walk there now and again later, from time to time, so quiet, more silent even than the desert at night, not even the sound of crickets. Tonight will be the first evening in Siberia this summer when the temperatures at sunset will already be below 100 degrees or 38 C. I want to be there then. I want to walk alone towards the darkening desert mountains then. I want to watch while the killer makes its evening retreat to the east. I haven't yet made a long nighttime excursion and overnight into the deep water near my ghost town home of Siberia. My reason is the fearful summertime heat which returns so soon after sunrise, and my knowing reluctance to wake in the morning far from the feigned safety of my motorcycle and the necessity of hiking so far back while the desert killer begins stalking in from the east. Twice in the past, the killer nearly got me. Once 2 years back, another time 3 decades before that, when I was young, strong, and a very real danger to myself. The last time the desert killer almost caught me, I had foolishly lingered too long in the vicinity of deep water and was nearly taken as I attempted a hasty and somewhat panicked escape across and over a desert, a barren badlands of slippery, decomposing granite. As I jogged along and through the craggy, rolling landscape, I worried that the loose rock would twist an ankle and leave me crippled and exposed to the coming killer. That experience was foolish, and the fear that I felt then was very real and well earned. I almost think I spotted death moving towards me then rather near from the north, from the deep end of the desert sea, wavering and flickering in the dry desert heat haze, a terrible mirage caught up in my panicked breathing, drawn to my hot, pounding pulse. Before that, many decades before, I left my little red truck by the road on a late summer morning in the Panamint Valley without water or a hat or any protection at all. I decided to hike to the desert, to a distant sand dune. So far, yet apparently so near. I turned back too late, perhaps 20 minutes too late, having failed my goal. I was very frustrated and so very stupid. I was nearly dead when I reached the truck again. My face was ghastly red, my body in the full riot of heat stroke. I later estimated that I probably had less than 30 minutes of life left in me then. The killer had been directly on my heels, though I had no way to know him at that young age. I was then quite blind and immortal. It took several hours for my strong, healthy body to recover that day. It's been decades since, and my mind has still not overcome the experience. Now I'm like a boy stung badly by bees who can't help returning to the hive. I gaze at the desert from a distance. I venture close when I can. I walk towards the deep water where the threat is real. I always turn back before the killer spots me. I know I'm playing chicken with a force which will not flinch. I cannot let myself meet the killer again. I can't afford even to get close. I have far too much joy in life to risk fruitless death. I have proud responsibilities I both recognize and gladly own. I have my people and loved ones who count on me, and I have these strange words I do dearly love to write and share. Yet I will go out again yet I will go out again to tempt the killer. I'll watch it more across the desert at dawn, to storm and rage all day and then pass away as the sun goes down. I'll watch, but I will not tempt. And I'll remember always that the killer will never get me, will never know me. I didn't do this right. Hold on, let me try this again. Yet I will go out again to tempt the killer. I'll watch it move across the desert at dawn, to storm and rage all day and then pass away as the sun goes down. I'll watch, but I will not tempt. And I'll remember always that the killer will never know me. Even if it sees me, even if it kills me, even if I someday blunder and stumble into its path, it will never, ever know me. It's interesting to note how the fearful things of my ordinary life refuse to accompany or follow me into the desert. Worries about money or career or reputation drop away as I ride my motorcycle into the wastes. It's as though these things can find no purchase or footing in a place where their concerns have no relevance. Or perhaps it's simply because these worries become mean and petty in the face of the more real and permanent truths I encounter in their stead. Like the rich man who spills coins from his hands while he looks up to find the executioner at the door, or the businessman who abandons all and runs ahead of an approaching plague, or the well-known figure who chooses loved ones over adulation while lying upon his deathbed. The curious thing is the way this effect lingers after my return, how I can walk like Caesar for days among my petty, civilized fears, looking down my nose at vanity, propriety, and esteem, respecting only love and goodness and virtue. I return always from the desert, haunted and empowered by a grave truth I can only know by going deeper and further than I'd like, by going past the limit of the more common sense, by rejecting my base mortal fear, and by always going alone. There are several ways to become lost in a desert. Only the most fortunate are never found. Even if they return to community, home, and loved ones, they are never found. Even if they live long into a ripe old age, they are never found. Even if a subtle smile graces their countenance for the rest of their days, they are never found. Their blessing is being never found. Their great secret is being lost. Their humble wisdom is knowing no way back. The following words are a confession of my selfish past and present, as well as a statement for my ongoing effort at improvement. I note these things for the benefit of my daughter, and her children, should they somehow inherit my want of going alone. I'd be lying if I said my path isn't scary. It is. The going alone theme isn't hyperbole. It's the perfect signpost on the faint trail where I prefer to walk, and the name of a destination I'll never reach. However, this route isn't nearly as solitary as it once was, as there are now some improved oases of human connection along the way, some better opportunity for time apart from the nowhere road to no place special. I'm no longer as long as I once was. I have my wife and my daughter, and my brother and my mom. Granted, I've always had these, though now I have them better than ever, and they have me. For better or for worse, we've each other now, and more than before. Sadly, though, the rest have fallen away, or rather, I have let them all go. It's a rather mean and callous thing, to be sure, but so too would be the artificial maintenance of connections I no longer want or need or desire to keep. I suspect that I am not capable of being a very good friend. Then it's probably, I suspect that if I am not capable of being a very good friend, then it's probably best to not be one at all. I do enjoy this quiet life. My strong abiding preference has always been to be alone. I prefer the solitary company of my steps and my thoughts. I prefer the empty landscape and long solitude of nights and days without others. I appreciate having no one to console or reassure me when I'm afraid or afraid of what's true, and I desperately want no one to distract me from the awful indifference which looms now across the horizon of my mind and gapes like a cold void at the frontier of my every solitary adventure. I'm lucky to have my wife, 30 years together, and she knows my journey. I have a partner who both allows and encourages this path I'm on. In the past, this going alone route sometimes drew me far away from her. Those were lonely times for us both. For me, the fact of being someone who was lost. For her, the fact of being married to someone lost and the consequence of married solitude. The last decade saw gradual improvement through the natural process of hard-won maturity and the persistence of commitment to the values my wife and I both share, and which we attempt to instill in our daughter through both lesson and example. The key change was our 14 months apart, that time when I came to America first and left my wife and daughter behind in Japan. That experience broke me. Thankfully, I was broken then. After we were reunited, I was a new man. I understood better the value of my human contacts, especially my family. I gave up going alone then, and for 2 years I focused on becoming a better husband and father, a better man. I think I succeeded. The improved quality of our lives is testament to this change, as well as the patience of my family in waiting for me to catch up to the values they already knew. But I knew I hadn't really changed. I just knew better what was most important. I know that I can never fully get off the path of going alone. And with this realization, I gave up on my friends. I gave up my connections. I abandoned social media and email and reduced my online footprint to a single blog and an occasional video. I found a good balance, a disconnected balance, disconnected from all but the most intimate connections, my wife, my daughter, my brother, and my mom. Now I go alone again. Every 2 weeks on a Friday, I literally go alone then. I go off to the desert and disconnect for a full 24 hours. I then return and reconnect. I reconnect with my wife and my daughter, and my brother and my mom. There's little to no connection with anyone else. My wife and I talk about this sometimes. She smiles and tells me she's lost all her interest in other connections too. Perhaps this is a factor of our shared age, or maybe it's because though we are very different, we nevertheless share the same road together for most of our lives. My wife and I spend far more and better time together now. We often smile at one another and hold hands like when we were dating, and we go places together and we walk. Whoa, I got just about. and we walk and we talk and we laugh like we once did. We just want each other now, and our daughter and our brother and our daughter and our brothers and our sister and our mother and father and our little dog and our little home, our safe little corner of the universe. It's a place where the great indifference can only peek in through the window from the cold and dark outside. That is, if it had any interest or ability to do so. It has no place here now. Its place is out there where nothing cares. I sometimes look out our window on a peaceful and happy Sunday night with my family, and I wonder at the dead indifference stalking the night out there in the dark, the dead indifference which never was alive and never died. Still, this path scares me, for though it's not fully alone, I know that I am alone. I found the great indifference early in life, and now I'm so far along there's no chance of returning back, though even if I could, I'd never turn back. For how can reason rightly turn away from what it knows is true? This path brings me closer each day to a once distant horizon growing near. It's a place I neither fear nor want. I can't turn back. And though I can't turn back, I know the remaining journey is secure with the ones I love. Secure until the moment we pass away forever from one another, with no chance of final reunion, no chance of final reconciliation, and no chance of final justice. I must attend to these things in the here and now. I must recognize and stand up to my fears now. No more cowardly hiding from this life through my time in the wastes. No more cowardly hiding from the wastes through my fear of what was never there. I wrote those words 6 years ago, and I can say that it has become even more so. Everything is pushed along that path. Yumiko and I are closer still than then, getting closer all the time. I have not forgotten the great indifference. I still embrace it every single day in my Good Life meditation, and things are just continually get better. I'm looking north from the edge of the desert towards. I'm looking north from the edge of the desert ghost town of Siberia. I'm standing at the edge of the deep water wilderness which extends into the horizon. At left is Black Mesa, a place I haven't yet reached. At center is the heart of the deep water, an intimidating badlands and maze-like moonscape of decomposed granite, flash flood channels, and gullies. At right can be seen the distant and hazy silhouette of the Old Dad Mountains and the much nearer unnamed Black Volcano I visited last winter, where I discovered the remains of Campo Number 1. I so want to strike out now into this wilderness. It's a place where humans seemingly never go, at least not since the 19th century gold hunters gave up and left. I'd go out there now if I didn't know the killer was already on its way and ready to meet me. Instead, I'll head back to my motorcycle now. I'll escape while I still can. Already the temperature has risen dramatically since sunrise, or maybe that's just my fear. Either way, it's a good time to get away. My GSA motorcycle is packed and ready to go. It's a shame to leave though, just as my imagination and thinking were acclimating to the silence and solitude. But that's all right, as bits of this piece always follow me home, adding incrementally to the joy and meaning of a well-lived life. In Japan, the landscapes I explored appeared new and young, almost adolescent, with steep and rugged mountains rising direct from the sea and long, narrow valleys twisting into impossibly remote and mist-covered peaks. Everywhere the rocks were jagged and angular, as though freshly fallen from cliffs and peaks. The mountains of Japan also roar and tinkle always with the sound of flowing water. Unbelievable quantities of clean, fresh, and cold water melting from snowy Alps, percolating from saturated mountain soils and raging through wild streams and rivers which rise and swell with abundant rainfall and the torrent of seasonal typhoons. The landscape has the character of youth, being bold, brash, and full of life and abundant energy. I was always in awe of the wilderness in Japan, though the effect was somewhat superficial, like the experience of watching a skilled athlete in control of a young and powerful body, or the impetuous activities of youth newly animated with the spirit of discovering they are alive. These things are impressive, though not often moving. The American desert is very different. The American desert is, the water's right here now. The American desert is very different. My time alone in the wild places here is like a stroll through a mausoleum of geology. The mountains are, let me move this back. The mountains are ancient and worn. The greater part of their being having been reduced to the sand beneath my feet. The rocks are angular like the rocks in Japan, though in the desert they say they stay this way for eons, there being little rain to capture, move, or grind away. You better move this stuff. The water's going to come all the way up there soon enough. The American desert is very different. My time alone in wild places here is like a stroll through a mausoleum of geology. The mountains are ancient and warm and worn, the greater part of their being having been reduced to the sand beneath my feet. The rocks are angular like the rocks in Japan, though in the desert they stay this way for eons. There being little rain to capture, move, and grind away their rough edges. The water that does come is powerful, yet brief and fleeting, like the smile of an old man remembering the joys of youth while the reaper places its hand upon his shoulder. And the desert is quiet and silent and at peace. The desert always has my respect and at times moves me like a great teacher or quiet sage, though I know it is neither. I'm glad I've known both landscapes. I'm grateful for the character lesson of each, as well as the example of good living they provide through two quite distinct and different seasons of life. I realize now that my repeated visits to Siberia have left an imprint there which I neither intended nor wanted. My brief living at that spot has marked it with my passage and added something to the mystery of that place. I always set up my camp at Siberia in the same spot. It's an area both convenient to my motorcycle and slightly protected from the desert's prevailing east wind. The sand beneath where I place my tent has become soft due to the removal of all but the smallest stones, and the four corners where I pound my tent stakes are clearly marked with the large stones I used to secure these into the ground. Finally, there's a small section of cut wooden railroad tie with a small metal grate secured to the top. This item is stuck into the sand just outside the rectangle of stones. I found this item in the desert some months back and brought it to the camp to serve as my cooking table. This is my camp at the ghost town of Siberia. It's a rough place of stone, sand, wood, and steel, yet its origin of human hands is clear. It's an artifact of human caring. The effect of these symmetrically placed stones surrounding an area of fine sand and accented with a wood and metal grate suggests human intervention. It's the same thing I experience now when I encounter old graves in the desert, or when I first discovered that stone-lined footpath through the middle of Siberia. These things tell us someone's been here. They suggest someone once cared in a place where caring has long since departed. My contribution to the mystery of Siberia is a rectangular perimeter of rock surrounding a bed of soft sand and an accent of wood and metal. I realize now that even if I never go back to Siberia, my fingerprints are there. My mark on that place is secure. I've added yet another strange human assembly of objects to that place. I've produced yet another mystery of stone and debris, something to perhaps catch and puzzle the mind of anyone who visits and looks closely today, tomorrow, or 100 years from now. The young man I once was would never join me in the desert. He'd know better than to not go alone. He'd make up some polite excuse to tell me no before giving me the social slip. I'd be proud of his foresight then, even if I knew he didn't understand the reason he must go alone. My young self would be such a burden in the desert, so lost and searching and full of energy, questions, and pointless speculation. I'm glad I wasn't there when I was that young man. I'd never invite my younger self to the desert with me. I'd do him that small favor at least. Otherwise, I'd be perfectly silent with him. I wouldn't tell him a single thing. Just a hint of my return to the desert, and my muse descends upon me as from nowhere. Is it really this easy to summon poetry, art, and the product of rich and fulfilling imagination? This strange catalyst of beauty, depth, and meaning, always at hand, forever at the ready, at least as long as our faculty of mind persists and our will to bend along the path of our natural inclination remains. The desert is not a good place of escape, as the wide open spaces provide nowhere to hide. There's no distance too far to separate us from where we deny or fear, which trails us easily in a landscape where the only footprints are our own. For the sake of hiding, it's much better to stay put within our safe and familiar, to bury ourselves under piles of routine and cover our eyes with the ordinary. I fear the desert not for the risk of becoming lost, but instead for the very real threat of being found. The forecast for tonight for the East Mojave Desert is mild temperatures and high winds. The experience of shutting off the big motorcycle's engine after driving in such a place and under such circumstances is not unlike plunging headlong from rocks into a mild churning sea. Shutting off the motorcycle's engine then is a shock after 200 miles of riding. The sudden is quiet, is deafening, like an implosive concussion drawn in. Let me try that again. Switching off the motorcycle's engine then is a shock. After 200 miles of riding, the sudden quiet is deafening, like an implosive concussion drawn in by the sudden cessation of sound. Night and deep darkness flood in as the bike's single headlight cuts out. Darkness and silence at once reign. The effect is enveloping, encapsulating, and smothering. Immediately, though, the wind pushes aside the silence and the night. There is a particular sound the wind makes in the desert at night. It's a rushing sound, the sound of confusion, the sound of disorder, the sound of entropy. The sound entropy makes as it slowly fills the universe with waste. At this moment, I'll stand upon the desert sand with my legs apart, a firm stand against the wind, a resolute posture in the face of the night, a long night, even after the daylight comes, a very long night. I've arrived in the desert ghost town of Siberia. This place is more empty now than ever before. There's no muse, no ghost, and no god. Even the wind is hushed, and only whispers through the branches of the creosote brush. Curiously, there's no fear here either. Those phantoms were never very real, they were never real anyway. Though for most of my life I allowed them some sway over my imagination and anxiety. No more now. There's nothing here but sand, stone, wind, and quiet. Sure, there's mortality too. Nothing to fear there either. Only a deeper and more silent dark than even the desert can muster. It takes time for our mind to adjust to solitude in wild places, to overcome our settled sense and shrug off the norms and conventions of social habit. I feel these things falling away slowly with every step removed into the wild. The sense is like becoming aware of a great apparatus and structure being carried upon the back, which I only note as it begins to fall away, piece by piece. How many steps would be necessary to remove it wholly? Is that even possible? What creature would I then become? The place I visited yesterday startled me for its natural artistry and seeming permanence in time and will-less beauty. While crossing over a rugged badlands of soft-colored pink and pale granite, a place devoid of visible life save some specimens of tiny red cactus blending easily with the stones and sand, I came upon a flat, high point displaying a curious natural feature called desert pavement. This strange geologic formation, this phenomenon occurs in deserts and mainly in areas where steady winds blow over high relief ground littered with tiny stones. The stones in this particular spot came from a nearby outcrop of reddish volcanic rhyolite peeking up through the much older granite country rock. Millennia of alternating heat and cold had chipped to bits the exposed face of hard rhyolite, which were then scattered evenly by random winds over an area roughly the size of a tennis court. This spot was perched on a perfectly flat rise overlooking a 360-degree landscape view encompassing roughly 200 square miles of empty desert. The wind here was strong and steady, and probably had been day after day, not for weeks or months, but for centuries and millennia. The constant wind had the working effect of a stonemason who might carefully arrange the broken rhyolite into a perfect mosaic before blowing away the sand, working over many centuries with wind from different angles and with the seeming accuracy of an Egyptian pyramid builder. The reddish puzzle pieces and pebbles had been blown about and fitted perfectly together with exacting accuracy. The final result was a perfectly flat expanse of desert stone, formed not as a solid sheet of rock, but instead as a fitted composite of tiny rocks, perfectly placed by the hand of wind and time and chance and an eternity of mindless patience. I sat upon the stones then to remove my shoes and walk barefoot, mindful of the small cactus, over the smooth face of natural art I'd found, perhaps never before seen by human eyes. I then sat for a long time upon the pavement, as the warm desert wind blew steadily at my back. I thought of all the small haphazard events which had created this natural wonder, and all the time it took to complete. I thought of the art of nature, which neither cares for recognition and praise, nor is capable of perceiving when such is offered. And I thought of my own brief witness of the same, and the hurried way. Even this small recognition and perception must soon be swept away like the sand which long ago was blown like waste from this desert ride. I failed to reach the deep end of the desert this weekend, despite the fact I hiked in further than I had in over a year. Depth clearly isn't a function of distance, though some distance is clearly needed. I'm beginning to detect a subtle vacuum force within the desert which draws me away to places I've difficulty climbing back from. I've so far tempted this force with no more than a day's journey, which I've always easily escaped. I'll soon try 2 days of depth. I wonder how much harder the climb back will be. Last week's trip to Siberia, my first night arrival on the motorcycle, the ghost town is located in an enormous valley of roughly 200 square miles without another human being anywhere. The only sign of human life here are the long trains which pass by occasionally in the night, and the 1 or 2 cars which glide through the dark like phantoms along Route 66. The darkness here is utter and complete on moonless nights like this, and when I shut off the motorcycle's engine and kill the light, the night swarms in like a smothering blanket, and I find myself gazing up at the stars like the hopeful companions they'll never be. My reconnoiter last week to the edge of the deep water wilderness has revealed the desert killer is gone. This means I can plan my first extended desert hike since returning to the USA. I'm thinking a 2 days, 2 nights outing from Siberia through deep water and into the Black Mountains. I'd lie if I told you the thought of going so far alone doesn't scare me, especially as I know my little God will certainly not join me there. I'm learning now there's good reason the deep desert is sometimes described as a forsaken land. These last 2 trips to the desert were more alone than ever, which is the aim and purpose of going. My companions in solitude were absent. The muse, the desert killer, my little God. Only indifference remained, which is devoid of companionship, and the thing which fills the solitude with empty. It's a little difficult to describe how alone I felt out here this night. There was literally no sign of humanity in any direction, not even the lights of airplanes. Only the wind made any effort at motion or sound or any activity which suggested I was still within the world of animate movement or life. Though there was no life here which would care for me, I'd left them a day away in another world in a place I could barely muster memory for the fact of its very real distance of mind. I was nevertheless very, very alone, with the soulless beasts roaming the dark, reminding me that I too have no soul, and therefore no capacity to survive any darkness greater than this night. And though I was alone, I knew that I was still not as alone as I'd yet like to be. Going alone is a far and deep trespass into places we both fear and marvel, and it is always possible to go too far, and always a fact that we must each one day go further than we can ever return. I'm not nearly ready to go that far. I have far too much love of life to wish that famed passage anytime soon. So, when the full moon finally began peeking over the invisible black mountains to the east of my night camp at deep water, I knew I'd then enjoy some relief from the deep night and some rest from the delicious anxiety of deep solitude, whichever has the capacity to satisfy, will always leave me more emptiness than was hoped for or sought. It's still 13 hours before I'll step away from my motorcycle and plunge headlong into the desert night to begin a 2-hour hike through darkness to the edge of deep water. Already, though, I sense the nothingness and empty of the deep desert come sniffing at my heels, seeking out my weakness, begging me to remember my fear. This feeling will only grow through the day, though it will dispel instantly once I'm swallowed by the night. Tonight's hike will begin at Siberia roughly an hour after sundown. The moon will be nearly full, providing pale illumination and rendering the landscape to shades of light gray against the black canopy of space. If I keep my flashlight turned off, then my eyes will adapt to the dark, and I'll easily pick my way through the desert, past obstacles such as rocks, cactus, and creosote brush. However, without my light, I might not spot rattlesnakes, which come out to hunt in the dark. With the light on, my pupils will close and my world will shrink to the shallow pool of bright illumination guiding my footsteps through the night. I'll then easily spot snakes, tarantulas, and scorpions, though without any trail to follow, I'll need to rely on instinct and the position of the moon as my guides. From time to time, I'll stop, turn off the light, and wait while my eyes readjust to the dark, and I can pick out the silhouette of the low mountains to the north, which are my aim, and the edge of deep water wilderness. After an hour or so of hiking through the dark, I should reach the edge of the Bristol Mountains. I'll need to select in the dark a narrow canyon to follow up and into the Badlands, which are my destination, and where I hope to reach before setting up camp for the night. These canyons are narrow with many small, dry waterfalls, so I'll need to hike carefully and remain extra vigilant for snakes, which hunt for rodents among the rocks. During daylight hours, when the snakes are hiding, I often see their winding tracks in the sandy places between the stones. An hour later, I should be near my goal. After a tricky scramble up a steep slope of decomposed granite, I'll come upon the Badlands Mesa I call the edge of deep water. From here, when I turn off my light, I can see over 200 square miles of empty desert between the Bullion Mountains to the south and the Old Dad Mountains to the north, the Granite and Providence Mountains to the east, and the extinct volcano of Pisgah, which names means summit in Hebrew, and was the mountain from whence God showed Moses the promised land to the west. In all that vast space, there will be only 2 signs of humanity, which are the twin red beacons atop the Bullion Mountains, marking the site of remote radio towers. In this place, I will stay the night. I fooled myself into thinking the desert killer was gone. I'd mistaken the killer for summer heat and the deep winter cold, and imagined some respite now between these extreme seasons. But I sensed it now as I rode my motorcycle down into the desert and away from the living comfort of my species. I sensed the killer out there in the dark, floating amidst the blind hills and mute mountains, over a landscape illuminated with faint moonlight, a natural light, illuminating the indifference and the grave things we all strive to forget over the course of our lives, until these things emerge from the fearful wastes to find us. I have no more need to fear the desert night than the warm and happy nest my family and I call home. The desert killer can find us now in either place. Only out here I can better see it coming. Small fear just before my arrival at Siberia. Terror of a sort, really. The fear hit me about a mile out, well, slowing the bike to spot the dirt road where I turn off Route 66. I'm always scared at this point, but tonight, wow. That little coward within let out a yelp and a squawk, saying, "Go! Don't turn, just go back the way you came." Of course I ignored him. I nearly always do. He's always wrong, though I suspect one day he'll be right. The waitress at Barstow kindly filled my thermos with hot coffee, so I'll have a cup here at Siberia before I start out walking into the mountains. The moonlight is superb, and I can see the black hills of the Bristol Mountains a few miles off to the north. The darkness within the mountains seems another thing, though I know I'll be able to see fine once I get there. The fear should pass shortly. It's interesting how cowardice so quickly flies before resolve. I'm back. The wilderness definitely got the best of me this time. I feel like a boxer who's gone several rounds with an opponent way out of his league. The feeling is good though, as it's satisfying to press limits and explore weakness of both body and mind. I'm sure I'll be thinking about the last 48 hours for years to come. I'm glad I have the chance to do these things while I still can. However, it's a bit unsettling to discover my body is now more fit for the wild than my mind. I found a note left for me on my motorcycle at the ghost town of Siberia, left for me by a young railroad signalman whom I'd met over the summer when he'd stopped by Siberia to maintain the railroad signal there. I left the note for him in return, as well as a nice specimen of a million-year-old petrified wood from the surrounding mountains. I think I better stop. I've only got a lot of pages left, and I'm down to the last bits of battery. I better check to see if there's any comments before I turn this off. I'll need to figure out how to do this better in the future so I can get through the whole thing. A question from Mitch. Michael, do you miss the desert at all? I have always been fascinated by that harsh wilderness of Western America, especially Route 66, and your imagery has always struck me as potent. I don't miss it at all, and I have no intent to ever go back. You should speak a little softly. Oh, okay. Thanks for letting me know. Hey, Michael, gonna have to drop now. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Michael. Take care. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. Be safe, but not too safe. Bye-bye.